By the late 3rd century, the Roman Empire had spent 40 years tearing itself apart. Dozens of emperors had claimed the throne, civil wars raged continuously, and hyperinflation crippled the economy. The system was cracking under the weight of its own massive borders. To stop the bleeding, Emperor Diocletian introduced a radical new power-sharing structure in 293 AD. It was called the Tetrarchy. Instead of one vulnerable man holding absolute power, the empire would be ruled by a college of 4 co-emperors. The Roman world was divided into 4 massive zones. 2 senior emperors, the Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, the Caesares, were assigned to different regions. This allowed Rome to simultaneously defend its European borders from Germanic tribes and its Middle Eastern borders from the Persians. In 305 AD, Diocletian did something highly unusual. He retired. The plan was for the senior emperors to step down so the junior ones could peacefully take their place. Constantine, the son of the new Western senior emperor, expected to be promoted into the vacant junior slot. He wasn't. Passed over and effectively held hostage at the Eastern court by his political rivals, Constantine feared for his life. He managed to flee west, traveling across Europe to join his father's military camp in Gaul, and eventually crossing the English Channel into Britain. He arrived just in time. His father, Constantius, was already ill. In the summer of 306 AD, while stationed at Eboracum, modern-day York, Constantius died. According to Diocletian's strict rules, the junior Western emperor should have seamlessly stepped up to fill the vacancy. Instead, the local legions stationed at York ignored the established line of succession and immediately proclaimed Constantine as the new emperor. That single illegal military elevation destroyed the carefully engineered balance of the Tetrarchy. Within months of Diocletian stepping down, the fragile promise of peaceful power transfers evaporated, dropping Rome right back into a brutal struggle for absolute survival. With the succession rules broken, other regional leaders saw their opening. Maxentius, the son of a former emperor, seized control of Italy. When the legitimate Western Caesar, Severus, marched south to stop him, his forces were defeated, and Severus died shortly after. The western half of the empire collapsed into a multi-faction free-for-all. Rather than rushing into the Italian meat grinder, Constantine played a patient game. He secured his base in Gaul and Hispania, establishing his headquarters at Trier near the Rhine River. For years, he focused on building massive border defenses and fighting off Germanic tribes like the Franks and Alemanni. By 312 AD, Maxentius faced local rebellions and deep unpopularity in Italy. Constantine saw his opening. He mobilized his battle-hardened legions and marched south across the Alps, cutting directly toward Rome. Maxentius chose to make his stand just outside the capital, using the Tiber River as a defensive barrier. The 2 rival armies finally met at a critical geographic choke point, the Milvian Bridge. Before the battle, Constantine claimed to experience a divine revelation. Ancient historians report that he had a vision instructing him to paint an early Christian symbol, the Chi Rho, on the shields of his soldiers, interpreting it as a sign of divine favor from the Christian God. The clash was decisive. Constantine's forces broke the enemy lines. Retreating in panic, Maxentius and his men were pushed into the river, where the heavy armor of the defending emperor pulled him underwater to drown. The man who had started as an unapproved usurper in York now held absolute control over Gaul, Hispania, North Africa, and Italy. The Milvian Bridge left Constantine as the sole, unchallenged ruler of the entire Western Roman Empire. The board was now reduced to 2 players. Constantine controlled the west, and an emperor named Licinius had consolidated power over the eastern provinces. In 313 AD, the 2 men met in Milan to broker a truce. To stabilize their exhausted populations, they jointly issued the Edict of Milan, a sweeping decree that legalized Christian worship and established religious tolerance across the entire Roman world. But the alliance was built on convenience, not trust. Over the next decade, border disputes, shifting alliances, and mutual paranoia slowly eroded the peace. Neither man was willing to share the highest office indefinitely. By 324 AD, the Cold War turned hot. Constantine pushed east, initiating the final massive civil war to decide who would control the Mediterranean. Constantine cornered Licinius with a brilliant 2-pronged defensive. He first destroyed the Eastern fleet in a massive naval engagement at the Hellespont, cutting off his rival's maritime supply lines. Weeks later, he crushed Licinius's ground forces at the Battle of Chrysopolis. To immortalize his rise to total supremacy, a massive monument was erected right next to the Colosseum. Standing 21 meters tall, the Arch of Constantine physically dominated the center of Rome. But his architects didn't carve all of it from scratch. They ripped reliefs and statues out of older monuments built by highly respected emperors like Trajan and Hadrian, grafting them onto Constantine's arch to visually fuse his rule with Rome's Golden Age. Following his final victory, Constantine had Licinius executed. 17.5 years after he was illegally proclaimed emperor in Britain, Diocletian's elaborate power-sharing experiment was completely dead. The Roman world was back in the hands of a single, absolute autocrat. With his rivals eliminated, Constantine now commanded an empire stretching from the Scottish borders to the edge of Persia. To fund his administration and stabilize the economy, he melted down precious metals from old pagan temples to mint massive quantities of new coinage. His first act as sole ruler was to move the center of gravity out of Italy. He chose an ancient settlement on the European side of the Bosphorus, where the Mediterranean meets the Black Sea, to build a brand new capital. He called it Nova Roma, though history would remember it as Constantinople. This massive fortress city provided a strategic perch to rapidly deploy his legions against northern tribes or eastern Persians. He applied that same drive for centralization to religion. In 325 AD, he convened the Council of Nicaea, gathering hundreds of bishops from across the empire to settle theological disputes. By standardizing Christian doctrine, he helped forge a unified, state-backed religious institution that was easier for the throne to manage. By the end of his 3-decade reign, he had completely saturated the empire with his image. Colossal statues, with heads over 2 meters tall, looked out over the citizens, projecting an aura of divine authority. Diocletian had tried to save the empire with bureaucracy and committee rule. Constantine replaced that system with a single sword. By the time he died, his new capital and state-backed church had become the 2 pillars supporting the Roman world's survival for centuries.